All right, so here's the experiment and we'll see if it plays out. So the first thing I did was I installed a plugin a couple days ago that is a Codex integration. We're looking at Claude Code. We're looking at a terminal screen. And what we did was we installed this plugin that's called CC Codex plugin. And I'll put the link in so you can see it. But what it lets you do from Claude Code is interact with Codex. And Codex has its own connection to LLMs, which in that case is using GPT 5.4. So I'm sitting here with Claude in Claude Code, and it has an integration to Codex and GPT 5.4. And what I'm saying is, listen, we're going to have both of you working. You may have heard the term LLM as a judge, and you may have gone, I don't know what that is. You may have heard the term evals. And again, you may be like, I don't know what that is. So here's what's going on. I'm telling it, look, I want you to create a brief for a podcast episode. Now, mind you, I've given it a podcast vision document, if you will. So it's not going to make it up out of thin air. I want you to create one of those episodes. And then I want you to take, but actually, I don't want you to create the episode. I want you to create the brief. And then what I want you to do is take that brief and pass it to Codex. And I want it to write the first version. And I want 3,000 words, which is about 20 minutes of my talking. So write it, and then it's going to come back. But then what I want you to do is create some evals. Now, evals are evaluations, and it's basically the same kind of thing that if you were homeschooling your child and you said, I want you to work on this, write me a little draft, and you may not be an English professor, but they would write something and then you would see, ooh, okay, we got some things to work on. And even if you kept the rubric in your head, you would know, let's make these changes. And so I'm saying, I want you to create a set of evals to score the whole thing. Now, I've given it a bunch of stuff, because one of the things you know about evals that you may not know is that they're incredibly powerful to reshape and rework how things are going, but that most humans aren't great about being able to articulate exactly what they're measuring and scoring. So that's why a lot of times when computers work with humans, they do things like saying, we set them up to do you like A or B, because we're good at being able to say, I'll know it when I see it, and I like that one better than that one. And then we ask computers to figure out what's going on behind the scenes. So in this particular case, I've given it my voice profile. I've given it some information about how I tell story or how story is structured. I've done another one on how podcast series are structured and another one on my audience segments. So it's going to use all of that information to create evals, which I don't have to then create. And then it's going to critique the draft and push it back. And it's going to do that. And I'm saying I want 5 turns. So get quality up to the best you can in 5 iterations max, and then save that version into a drafts folder. So it came back and it said, all right, so 2 quick questions, because I told it what I wanted. It summarized what I told it, and then it said 2 quick questions. Do you want a specific rubric or a single overall score? Let's do 1. I want both a rubric and a final overall score. And then for 2, should I go ahead now and get started? Yes. Let's start with 1 episode and see if the workflow works. All right. We don't know if this is going to work or not. We're literally going to just try it and see if we can get the 2 of these guys talking. If one of them is, in this case, Codex is the LLM that's writing, and Claude Code is the LLM that is judging, or the LLM as a judge. And we're creating a loop, which, by the way, there's nothing magical about 5. You could do 10, you could do 20. It doesn't actually take a lot of time, which means you're not involved. And it's already working on stuff. So you'll see that the first thing it's doing is it's created a brief. So that was the outline, if you will. And then it's created a rubric, and that's how I'm going to judge. And so it's taking all this information, and now it says, okay, I'm going to send the brief to Codex, and we hope it works. And then it comes back with a brief, and it won't take a long time for Codex. If this is all wired, it won't take a long time for Codex to come back and say, yeah, here's a 3,000 word draft. And then And then we just go, okay, did it score it? Did it improve it? I did this on a RFP writer for a buddy a few months ago. And it's amazing what happens. In this case, I wasn't going back and forth with two LLMs. I was just using Claude Code. But it's amazing when you have the actual LLM that produce something, which, by the way, the first time you have an LLM like Claude or Claude Code, when you have them write something that actually is good, you're like, this is great, because you're judging it based on not just what you would write, you're judging it on how well it did compared to your expectation and how fast it did it. So you're like, oh, it's going to be trash. And then 4 seconds later, it's like, boom. And you're like, this is pretty good. But that doesn't compare to what you could do on your best day. And it doesn't compare to what you could do on your best day with infinite amount of time. You're not evaluating it that way. So when you start saying, oh, great, but now here's my criteria for evaluating this, rerun it, like go ahead and edit it. All of that, we did like 2 or 3 iterations on Claude for its content. And all of a sudden it was like massively better, because evals do that. This is totally different than when you're homeschooling your kid and you're like, hey, Jimmy, Billy, Susie, that's not right. And they start falling apart. They're crying because you critique them. The computer doesn't have those feelings. And so it's easy to say, here's where you didn't hit, the standard that you wanted. And so do better. And here's how to think about doing better. So here we go. We're seeing that the piece was written. And then when it was written, it's getting its first score. And already I'm seeing the score be pretty high. So 7.9 out of 10, that's not bad. So of course, the ancillary lesson here is the more you equip with your own initial artifacts, which in this case, in the resource folder, I had 4 or 5. And if you read all the stuff I gave it, you're like, well, yeah, no wonder it could write a brief that was good. But that's neither here nor there. We want it to start good. What we want to know is, can we get it to improve? In this case, 7.9, I'd love to see it get into the 9s, like maybe a 9.3. We don't know. So now we're sending the feedback back, and then it's going to now read our stuff and it's going to iterate. And so it's going to do it all over again. And it looks like right now we are passing it, from what I'm reading, we're passing it all those other artifacts that I had created, which is fantastic, right? Because we're basically saying, hey, heads up, here's ways to think about it to make it better. So that's good. I don't have a problem with that. And then we're going to get something back. And, this video, I don't know, we're on probably 5 minutes. This video isn't long when you think about how much stuff is going on. And you're getting 2 LLMs, which, by the way, the other day I was talking to a buddy who said, well, why use 2? Why not just use, like what I had done with the RFP writer was just iterating in Claude Code. Why use a second? And I go, well, do you manage developers? He goes, yeah. I go, great. Do you ever have one of them QA their own work? And he goes, no. I go, these are resources, are LLMs, and they're going to have their defaults. Whatever learning they did, however they were trained, they're going to have defaults. And that doesn't mean they're perfect, but it is helpful to have a completely different LLM trained slightly differently to interact with each other, function as a council, or function as debaters, if you will. The argument will get crisper if you have 2 intelligent debaters who are going back and forth. And that's what we're hoping for here, right? We're building out not only LLM as writer, but LLM as judge, bringing them together to make a better draft, which, by the way, we still have to read. It's not like we just go, okay, we're done. But here we go. Eval 2 is coming in, and look at what's happening. 9999. We're going to be in the 9s. And when we get, there's 1 8 in there. All right. We're at 8.9. I wonder if it's going to say, hey, we're good. And so I'm going to say, that's fine. Save it to draft. And we can call this experiment done. Now, had we not had the first LLM or Claude write a rich brief, and you saw it up here. This was back here. Here's the topic. Here's the angle. Here's the key decision. Here's the hook. Here's the target audience. Here's the story architecture. Here's the takeaway. I mean, That's a lot. That's not a little 2 sentence. I want an AI podcast episode. So you expect that this, because it came from all of our content, and then this rubric of how to score it also came from a lot of our files. So lesson number one, write as much as you can about what you care about so that, the LLMs can use it. But lesson two is this CC Codex plugin allows us to have two LLMs go back and forth. And that allows us to improve from a 7.9 to an 8.9. And that, in terms of leaving us with a product, is pretty powerful. So hope you liked it and hope it makes sense.